Gen Z is so used to seeing this image of perfection on their social media feeds, right?
Yeah.
Everything is kind of perfectly curated. I think there's just sort of this element of high expectations that are totally unrealistic for sex that are kind of keeping people back from having more authentic connected sexual experiences. When I wrote my book, You Could Be Having Better Sex, that was really my goal, was to teach people how to have more connected sexual experiences.
What can 4,000 college students teach us about the future of sex, relationships, and modern intimacy? Today, we're joined by Dr. Nicole McNichols, the professor behind the largest human sexuality course in the United States. Her expertise has been featured by the New York Times, CNN, NPR, The Tamron Hall Show, and more, bringing evidence-based sexual health education to millions of people. In this conversation, we explore what Gen Z is teaching us about relationships and sex. We also dive into her new book, You Could Be Having Better Sex, and discuss what she's learned from teaching, writing, and communicating sexual health on some of the world's biggest media platforms. If you've ever wondered what the next generation really thinks about sex and what all of us can learn from them, this episode is for you. Welcome to Sexology Lab. Each week, we speak with the most compelling minds in modern sexology to ask the questions shaping the future of desire, connection, and human wellness. Let's dive in. Welcome to the lab, Dr. Nicole McNichols.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you join us today. Now, where in the world are you joining us from?
I am joining you from Seattle, Washington.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. I'm so excited to talk to you about many different things today. I want to start out with education. So, you teach the largest human sexuality class in the country. And what does teaching over 4,000 students every year teach you about modern intimacy?
It teaches me is that students have so little information coming into my classroom. And this isn't a surprise. We don't have any federally mandated sex education, as you know. And so a lot of them are coming in with just a dearth of basic knowledge about the realities of sexual anatomy or sexual response. They're really coming in not knowing how to communicate with a partner about how to have better, more connected sex. They, feel like they are really embarrassed and ashamed, right? And so I feel like that's the other thing that really comes into my classroom is both a lack of really accurate, helpful information about their bodies and relationships, as well as just a whole lot of shame and stigma around the topic in general, that it really kind of becomes my goal to then dismantle through the quarter so students feel less ashamed and more empowered with information about their bodies, themselves. So my goal is really to help educate them about basic information about their anatomy and response and how to communicate and consent and, even understanding things like the challenges of keeping passion alive in a long-term relationship, as well as other types of alternative relationship structures that might work for them, or, understanding that there's not just one type of sex that people have, that there's a variety of ways to express yourself sexually and experience pleasure. And so I feel like this goal of mine, which is to really help people understand more about their bodies, more about themselves, more about the types of sex that feel good to them, not just what porn and the media is telling us, as well as this aim of making them feel less ashamed and less embarrassed to talk about these topics, is really kind of both the challenge as well as the opportunity that I have in my classroom.
Yeah, and your class looks like so much fun. I watch your reels on Instagram, and there's always like a fun topic or like a guest presenter or something really exciting going on.
Yes, I try to bring in a lot of diversity. So whether it is a dominatrix who's teaching us about consent, or a panel of polyamorous guests, or somebody who's speaking about sexuality and aging, or about gender biases in medicine, it really is just the kind of class where I'm trying to bring in as many different voices as possible. And I think that's really what has made the class successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's probably fair to say that a lot of your class is Gen Z. Does that sound right?
Yes, it is. I am teaching college undergraduates between ages 18 and 22.
So, how is Gen Z different from previous generations when it comes to sex and relationships?
Well, they're different in a number of ways. First of all, they have much more fluid ideas around gender and sexuality. They've grown up with sort of more flexible ideas and permission to experiment and to understand the idea that rarely do we fit neatly into a binary box, and that it's okay if you don't have your sexuality completely figured out from day one. And so as a result, when we look at demographics at nationally representative samples, and this is also what I see reflected in my own classroom, 22 of Gen Z identifies under the LGBTQ umbrella. Of that fifth, approximately, that do, about 80% of them identify as being bisexual. So I'm really addressing a class that has just this beautiful array of sexuality and identities, and really is open to understanding and experimenting with what they're interested in a diverse number of ways. The other thing, though, is that we have a generation of kids where they're coming in, they actually have less access to sex education than we did, in the 90s or even early 2000s. There's been more restrictive sex education bills in the last 5, 10 years than there have been laws that are mandating it. And so as a result, they are learning about sex from porn. And I'm not here to say that porn is categorically evil in any way, but when you're using it as a form of sex ed, as opposed to just something that is a form of fantasy, you're coming in with ideas about sex and sexual expression that are not really based on reality. And so a lot of them, for example, even though fewer are actually having sex than they were a generation ago, which is sort of astonishing. Despite the fact that we're in this very sex saturated culture, they're coming in thinking everybody is around them is having a lot of sex, but the reality is that they're not, right? The reality is that they're having less sex than we think they are. But there's sort of this paradox because the type of sex they're having is a lot rougher and kinkier than the sex that we used to have. And I think that is largely maybe driven from porn, although to be fair, porn is going to model itself off of what people are searching for and what the algorithm feeds people. So there's a bit of a duality, a dual process there. But when I poll students, of the ones that report they are sexually active, about 80% of them report that the last time they had sex, they engaged in sexual choking, right? Which is just an example of the types of rough sex that most Gen Z are really engaging in, right? There really is sort of this idea that vanilla sex is boring and that if you're going to be a sexually evolved person, it needs to be kinky and wild. And building off of that, that your penis needs to be 8 inches long and that you should immediately get hard or immediately become lubricated and you should respond the way a porn star does. And so, of course, that's just not the reality. I mean, a lot of what I have to teach them is that real sex is awkward, right? It's normal to laugh during sex. It's normal to cry after sex. It's normal to have your body make weird noises. It's normal for you to experiment with something and actually have it be a complete flop. And that's okay, right? A lot of it is about having a growth mindset and understanding that you've got to try these different things and experiment. And sometimes they'll work out, but sometimes they won't. And that's kind of part of the process. So Gen Z is really unique. They're having a lot less sex, but the sex they are having is very performative. So a lot of my goal is kind of trying to unravel that.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And I think a lot of times, like that awkwardness is where you build intimacy with a partner, like
Yes.
dealing with those awkward situations that come up when you're having sex.
Exactly, exactly. And just because there are those awkward moments doesn't mean that the sex can't be fantastic, right? It's about just rolling with those awkward moments and being okay with maybe laughing. Sometimes sex is a little bit like that first pancake. The first time you try it, it's a little wonky, but then it gets a lot better after that. So you just have to kind of roll with it and learn from what is feeling good and what's going well. And then being able to kind of use that type of feedback to better try for something that might be better next time. But I think it also just comes from Gen Z, especially, they grew up with social media. So Gen Z is so used to seeing this image of perfection on their social media feeds, right?
Yeah.
Everything is kind of perfectly curated. You're not seeing the bloopers usually. And even if you are seeing the bloopers, even they're kind of highly curated.
Hmm.
So I think there's just sort of this element of high expectations that are totally unrealistic for sex that are kind of keeping people back from having more authentic, connected sexual experiences. When I wrote my book, You Could Be Having Better Sex, that was really my goal, was to teach people how to have more connected sexual experiences. Right. Because to have better sex, it can be rough if that's what is enjoyable to you, but it doesn't have to be. And it doesn't have to be every single time. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to have a certain type of body, but you do need to understand how your body works, and you do need to know how to communicate. So by helping people understand these things, it kind of gets rid of this, again, level of perfectionism and performance that can really take away from the pleasure that we deserve to be having and are entitled to in our sexual experiences.
Are you curious about sexology? Do you want to further integrate sexology into your work or your life? Well, friends, then we've got something just for you. It's called the Sexology Practice Guide, and it walks you through the ways this shows up in your work, in your life, and guides you through working within your scope, incorporating intimacy and sexual health into your work without starting over. Download this short, practical guide at sexologylab.com/guide. That's sexologylab.com/guide. And while you're here, make sure to subscribe and share. And now, back to the show.
Absolutely. And I think this is so interesting because I think Gen Z, likely from the moment they were born, has been filmed, in one way or
Yes.
another. Their parents probably put pictures of them on Facebook. I saw something the other day that said they don't dance as much at the clubs because somebody could film them and it could be embarrassing later.
Isn't that tragic? I
I
mean,
know.
dancing is just one of those times when you should not be self-conscious. It's that is a lot like
Yeah.
sex. Exactly. And I think
Yeah.
that's just spot on. They're so used to being filmed. They're so used to everything having to be Instagram, TikTok, or Snapchat ready that the idea of doing something that could make you feel awkward, right, and being
Mm-hmm.
authentic just feels really frightening. Yeah.
Yeah. And realizing you can live in the moment. Nobody is going to be posting photos of this sexual experience on Instagram later. You
Yes.
can just have this private moment where you can be awkward, and that's okay.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Now, your new book is called You Could Be Having Better Sex. What is the biggest thing standing in the way of that for most people?
Think that people feel like they want better sex, but don't really know where to start. Right. And so my book really kind of presents a blueprint for, okay, let's start at the beginning. Let's really understand our bodies. And you may think that you understand what pleasure feels like, what the techniques are, but actually there's a lot of really good information out there that is gathered from research about the types of touch and technique that can lead to orgasm and response, whether we're talking about penetrative sex or oral sex or different types of sex toys and different types of positions, because there is a lot we can learn if we're just understanding our bodies and what huge amounts of research really tell us about pleasure and eroticism. And then
Yeah.
it's getting into kind of the brain, right? Understanding that we can't expect ourselves to turn on the way we do in porn. So looking at the pleasure cycle and sort of how to work through many of the psychological blocks that keep us from being excited about the sexual experiences that we are wanting, but don't quite know how to get to. Sometimes we blame our partner and feel like it's a lack of spark or attraction in our relationship, when the reality is that it's really about a lack of attraction to ourselves. It's
Mm.
really about feeling like you don't know how to turn yourself on, because if you don't know how to turn yourself on mentally, if you can't get to that headspace, you're not going to be able to show up and be sexually present for a partner. That's sort of the foundation, is sort of the individual. And then the middle foundation, so the bottom foundation, and it's all organized within this hierarchy of sexual needs. So that foundation is like, let's talk about your body and brain. This middle level is more about, okay, how do you now connect with a partner? How do you communicate? How do you express your needs in a way that feels like you're being true to yourself while also talking to a partner, right? Sex can be really awkward to talk about. It can feel like it's something that you just don't really know how to put on the table, and you're afraid to bring it up with your partner because it's just going to be weird, right? So it's really trying to give people the tools for how to do that. And then in the third level, evolve, it's talking about how we really need to lead with curiosity, right? And so whether that's looking at, okay, maybe the answer is opening up our relationship, or thinking about what that might look like, or maybe it's experimenting with a little bit of novelty or kink, or maybe it's about really looking at our sexual fantasies and what that might mean, and maybe how to even just borrow small elements of these things and bring them into our sex life in a way where we don't feel like we're becoming a different person, but we're adding spice in a way that feels like it's just the right amount of novelty, not an overwhelming amount. So it's really trying to take the reader through a progression from kind of this foundation of being in touch with yourself, your body, and your mind, and then engaging with a partner, and then exploring through curiosity. I'm really just sort of excited for people to finally have. I think it's going to help a lot of people who feel a little bit stuck and don't really know where to start.
I mean, this sounds like a book that everybody needs. Like, this is amazing.
Thank you. That is exactly the frame of mind I had when I read it. This should really be on everyone's nightstand
Yeah.
because we all could be having better sex. It is within our grasp. We just need to kind of know where to start.
Yes. And what inspired you to write this book?
What inspired me was looking around at a world where culture is just saturated with images of sex. We see it on social media, we see it on Netflix, we see it in porn, and yet we're in the midst of a sexual recession, right? We talked about how this is showing up a little bit in my class with my students, but it's also present among adults. People are exhausted. People are overwhelmed. People don't know how to make a spot for intimacy in their lives. And I really am presenting this book to the world saying, you deserve to have pleasure and sexual intimacy. You are entitled to it. And it is important to you as a person for your own well-being. And it is important to your relationship. So let's talk about these things and find a way to make it better so that we aren't all just struggling in a declining sexless marriages. Let's figure out how to put it back on the table and work through these difficult issues.
Wonderful. And even though you're a professor, this is not a textbook, right? This is something for everyone.
No. Oh my gosh. No, this is something written for everyone. This is a fun book to read. That is something that you will breeze through and learn a lot of interesting things that maybe you thought you knew about, but you actually don't. You're going to feel really empowered and motivated to have better sex.
So I'm curious, what's one thing that people think creates good sex that really does not?
People think that it needs to be just spontaneous and happen without any planning, when the research shows that people who are planning intimacy are actually A, experiencing more desire as a result of it, and B, experiencing more pleasure, not less. There tends to be this myth that if we plan sex, somehow it will take the mystery out of it. It will make it boring. But the reality is, think about how you have anything else in your life that you're excited about, that you are anticipating and looking forward to, right? Like a vacation or an experience with going out with friends or with your partner. It's something we prioritize and put on the calendar. But at the same time, I think a lot of people hear about this idea of planning sex and kind of go to this place where it feels sort of, God, if I do that, it'll ruin the mood, or that it'll be a contract. And it doesn't need to be a contract. It just needs to be setting what I call an intimacy date, where first of all, you're having these conversations, but then, yeah, you're giving yourself time to wait and do whatever grooming you need to do. You're giving yourself a space to get yourself into sort of the right mindset, to close your laptop earlier in the day, to get yourself into a place where you feel like you're going to be more in the mood for it that night. So looking at this idea of planning intimacy. And so it's not really about you're halfway through unloading the dishwasher and just go have sex, right? It's about putting effort into it. And so I was sort of framed the planning as it's not about just scheduling. It's about putting effort into the experience because that is going to make it better. And then, I think the second thing is sometimes in relationships, we tend to think that increasing relationship satisfaction is naturally just going to lead to more or better sex. But there's really clear research coming from Dr. Amy Muse. She followed thousands of couples and really tried to understand longitudinally, how does this sort of progress, right? Sexual satisfaction first and then relationship satisfaction or vice versa. And what she found was that among couples, it was more often the case that they reported higher levels of sexual satisfaction upticked when they put more effort into that and started experiencing more pleasure together. Their relationship satisfaction later on increased. In other words, the direction was from more sexual satisfaction to more relationship satisfaction, not vice versa. That's an important finding because it suggests, yes, of course, working on your relationship is important. And I talk in my book about all these other different types of intimacy that absolutely feed into sexual intimacy, right? We have intellectual intimacy and aesthetic intimacy and spiritual intimacy. But the reality is that when we focus on sex, that is going to lead to better relationships. And I think that's an important piece to not get missed, right? And it's
Yeah.
going to happen both in the short term. Studies show that on days after we've had sex with our partner for about 48 hours, we experience an afterglow and we also become more tolerant of our partner's minor annoyances. It's a lot easier to forgive the toothpaste cap off when you've had an amazing orgasm with them the night before.
This is a true story.
Because so much I think of what can ruin a relationship or ruin sex in a relationship are those little resentments that build up about little things. And sometimes they're small, sometimes they're larger. Sometimes if a person feels like they've really given up an important aspect of themselves or their career or their interests, because they've had to just put that on the back burner for another partner, or if they feel like they're just always being rejected, right? Those can lead to little resentments. But when we're having intimacy and experiencing good sex, it gives a little bit of a cushion for those types of things.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that those resentments don't need to be worked on and communicated through, but the reality is that there are going to be certain things in our relationship about our partner that are always going to frustrate us. A good way to cope with that is by focusing on that one area, sexual intimacy, which is going to make us more tolerant. So it really is underappreciated as an element of a relationship that can be worked on and that can really provide beneficial effects overall.
Yeah. So it's part of working on your relationship because I think sometimes people think of these as two completely separate things. But,
Yeah.
Being intimate together is part of the whole relationship picture.
Yes, exactly. But just working on your relationship by itself is not going to be the only answer for a better sex life. There needs to be conversations specifically about sex.
Now, you said in your book, you talk about different types of intimacy and you mentioned aesthetic intimacy. So I've never heard this term before. So can you tell me what that is?
Yes, absolutely. So I talk in my book about when we think about this word intimacy, we only think it involves sex. The reality is that we have things like aesthetic intimacy, like you mentioned, which might be enjoying an incredible meal together or a beautiful sunset or a beautiful art piece or just admiring something together that you both feel a sense of understanding each other's sense of awe, right? Sharing in that awe.
Yeah.
We also have intellectual intimacy. So this might be sharing ideas about whether it's current events or topics in your life or different things that you're interested in, whether it might be topics in your career, but sharing sort of those thoughts and feeling like your partner really respects and appreciates those different ideas that you have and is building off of them and is really listening to you. And then we have spiritual intimacy, which is tied to a shared sense of values, a shared sense of a world view. And then what's really often lost is just physical touch, non-sexual forms of physical touch. That's also an important form of intimacy. If the only time you are touching your partner is when you are trying to have sex with them, that's going to lead to, you're going to feel like, gosh, they're touching me. They must want something. And that can lead to this sense of dread, which is horrible to feel in a relationship. If you're used to hugging your partner and used to spending time with them on the couch, cuddled, right? When your partner comes in at the end of the day, the first thing you should do, and the Gottmans have shown through their research that this is a powerful tool, have a 20-second hug. Engage
Wow.
in that physical touch. Have a 7-second kiss. Also, research behind that. It
Yeah.
lowers your cortisol. It syncs up your nervous system. It really allows you to kind of feel connected at an emotional level with your partner before moving into maybe a more physical or sexual place. So that non-sexual physical touch is really, really important. There's also really interesting research coming out showing that non-sexual physical touch can be an extremely effective way to help a partner who's struggling with body image issues,
Mm.
because body image can be something that a lot of people struggle with, both men and women, where it keeps you from being able to feel present during sex because you feel like you're always judging yourself or picking yourself apart. And
Yeah.
you don't have that sense of feeling hot or sexy, which is kind of, you need a little bit of that in order to be really present in a sexual experience. And so when you're showing non-sexual physical touch, it's a little bit of this idea that actions speak larger than words. You're sort of showing your partner at almost an unconscious, subconscious level that you do love their body. You want to be touching their body. You want to be connected to their body. And that's a really powerful tool. All these
Yeah.
emotional intimacy, all of these different forms of intimacy feed a relationship and are going to make sexual intimacy feel more like it is part of the mix and not something that's just transactional where it's the only time you ever connect.
And now I'm curious who you wrote this book for. Is it for single people, people in relationships? Is it for younger people, older people? Who's this book for?
It truly is for everyone. So it is for the person who's been in a 20-year marriage and they feel like things are fine, but could be a lot better. It's for a couple that's in a 20-year relationship and might not be having much sex at all and doesn't even know where to start to get it back on the table. It's for the couple that might be happy, but thinking about whether there's more and both of them are interested in maybe opening up. And there's a whole chapter on kind, compassionate ways to experiment with that. It's for the 20-year-old or the 30-year-old who's trying to navigate sex and dating culture, but feels
Mm.
that sense of frustration with not being able to communicate what it is that they're looking for or finding what they're looking for. It's for the person who might be interested in experimenting with a little bit of kink or with a little bit of role play, but doesn't even really know where to start or feels like it might be scary to even begin. So it's really speaking to all of these audiences and normalizing all of these experiences as a way to say, you have permission to have better sex, and here's a roadmap for how to do that.
I love that so much. Amazing. I want to get one for everyone in my life now. Like, I think they need
Thank
it.
you.
And I'm curious a little bit about the book writing process. What
Yeah.
was your favorite part about writing this book?
I'm a research nerd. I was coming to this book more from the perspective of, oh my gosh, there's so little understanding out there. And yet there's so much fantastic research on all of these topics. And if I can translate this research into a format that feels accessible and understanding and relevant to people's lives, that's really going to be helping people. Right. So I think that just being able to imagine all of the different types of readers that would be looking at this book if it was on Amazon or in a bookstore and thinking about picking it up and thinking about what are the questions that they might have or the obstacles or pain points that they have in their own sex life and coming to it with research and saying these are some answers that can really get you started and can really help, not because it's my own opinion, not because I've only seen them work on 2 or 3 or a handful of couples, but
Yeah.
because we have these studies that are on thousands and thousands of couples and singles, and I can take some of these findings and apply them to your life in a way that can be truly beneficial. So I think it was sort of that translational aspect, taking the science and making it into a form that can be understood and applicable and fun to read for a person who's coming at this from really any angle.
I love that. Making research accessible for people is so incredible because your average person probably isn't going to pick up a research paper and like go through it.
Exactly. Definitely not.
I'm curious how it's gone promoting this book because I think mainstream audiences could sometimes be a little squeamish about talking about sex. So, what has your experience been like sharing this book with the world?
It's been amazing. I've been thrilled with how it's been received. It won a award from the Next Big Idea Club. Julie Gottman and John Gottman told me that it's something that they want to recommend to all of their clients, that it's, one of the best
Wow.
books they've ever read. So that was amazing. And I've gotten to speak on probably over 100 podcasts at this point. And it's just been amazing getting this message out to as many people as possible. Ultimately, I just wrote this book to help as many people as possible with the topic that's just awkward to talk about. So it's just been a lot of fun and really rewarding.
That is amazing. You reach millions of people every day. So through media, podcasts, social platforms, you've been featured like in the New York Times, CNN, NPR, the Tamron Hall Show. I could go on and on and on. So what is it like for you having this giant audience that you can teach and reach out to?
It's overwhelming at times, right? It feels like a giant responsibility to make sure that I'm really giving them helpful information that is a precise reflection of what the science actually shows. But it's also exhilarating, right? I mean, getting to
Yeah.
talk to this many people who all really have a lot of questions about sex and relationships and dating and marriage and long term and short term. It's just been really fun to feel like I can connect to so many people who have these questions. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, my last question for you. Now, if you could put one message about sex, intimacy, or relationships on a billboard for the entire world to see, what would it say?
It would say own your pleasure, right? With the idea that this is within your wheelhouse. I'm giving you the tools and it requires effort, right? It requires saying, this is important and I want this to get better and I want to educate myself and I want to be able to talk to my partner about these things. But it takes a sense of personal responsibility. And that's going to be married with a sense of entitlement. We tend to think of pleasure as something that's peripheral, right? But the reality is that pleasure overall is a critical component of mental health, and sexual pleasure is part of that. So if people can understand that pleasure is important, sexual pleasure is important, but that you need to take the first step in understanding the responsibility to yourself to be able to achieve it, that's really where all of this needs to begin.
That is such a wonderful message. I wish you could put that on a billboard because I love it.
You.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us in the lab today, Dr. Nicole McNichols.
Michelle, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.
Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. Links are in the description below.